Evening, everybody. Welcome to Cllr College. Welcome to the Global Centre for Healthcare GCHU Seminars. And I also want to say welcome to the new MSc students in Sustainable Urban Development Masters. Welcome, everybody. And I also understand there are DPhil students from the Sustainable Urban Development in various years of their journey. So welcome to Cllr College. In first week, we're going to be talking about 15-minute cities. At the moment, this is a highly political and controversial at times topic, but we are going to take 4 talks, and then we're going to have an informed debate where we'll take questions from the floor. And without ado, I'm going to hand over to the Director of GCHU Research, Dr. Juliet Carpenter. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Carl. A year ago, the 15-minute city concept was little known outside the specialist world of urban planning. Today, it's a notion that's getting considerable airtime and column inches all over the world, although commentary isn't always based on fact and evidence. The 15-minute city is based on the notion of access to essential services by walking and cycling to reach everything we need in everyday living, be that shops, healthcare, education, culture, to minimise travel time and put a focus on local neighbourhoods. And it's a concept that was popularised in Paris in 2016, from 2016 by Professor Carlos Moreno, an urbanist. But its roots go back far further than that, back to the 1960s and Jane Jacobs' work on the death and life of great American cities. So it's by no means a new concept, but we feel it's a notion that warrants further exploration, new evidence and new understanding to inform the ongoing debates about its impact and relevance for cities today. So this seminar is the starting point for that inquiry, for we're just about to launch a new research project called ENACT, with partners from Brookes University, from local authorities here in Oxford, the Town and Country Planning Association, and with partners in 3 other European cities, from Poland, Spain and Norway. So I'm delighted to welcome the 4 speakers here today to give their perspective on the 15-minute city. Thank you for joining us, and to start us thinking critically about the 15-minute city and can it work for everyone. So we'll start off with Tim Jones, who's Professor of Sustainable Urban Mobility at Brookes University, and he's leading the UK team for the ENACT research project that we're just about to start. So Tim.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. I drew the short straw to go first, so here we go. So I'm going to make 4 points. First of all, this is not a new principle, it's rather a new narrative. Secondly, it's already implicit in policy over successive governments, stretching back as early as the kind of early 90s, but arguably before that. I'd argue it's relatively uncontroversial, and I'll show you why I think that in a moment, despite the moral panic that's been caused around 15-minute cities and that's been whipped up around that. The challenge, though, lies in the delivery, and I'll map out some of those challenges. So, you know, the narrative isn't new, as I've already explained. We go back to the Garden City movements. We look at polycentric cities, the idea that where growth should take place and there should be local centres for access everyday services. Transit-oriented development, thinking around how we can develop and create diversity and density of housing and development around public transport hubs. Chrono-urbanism, I guess you could place the 15-minute city in that, thinking about how long it takes to access those services. And as Juliet's already alluded to, Jane Jacobs' treatise, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, really railing around segregation of uses and suburbanisation and people having to use a car, no other choice but to use a car to get around the urban areas. Of course, our Traffic in Towns Buchanan report in the 60s, also Buchanan visited the US and suggested there's nothing to be gained by following the US urban sprawl approach, and obviously predicted traffic growth and thought about how we should contain traffic and manage traffic in urban areas. I should say these slides will be available, so I'm not expecting you to read all of the text on it. And then it's embedded in our national planning policy framework, the English framework. It sets out that how we should ensure there's opportunities for people to access local services on foot, by bike, or by public transport, and ensuring those patterns are locked in to development and creating high quality places. So although 15-minute cities isn't a policy, it's kind of implicit in the national policy and planning framework. There has been a petition to require, asking authorities to be required to hold referenda before they implement 15-minute cities, but the government's responded back that, well, it's nothing new, it's implicit in our national policy planning framework, and it's up to local planning authorities to decide how they deliver those principles. It's embraced internationally. We know that the importance around reducing energy consumption for cities. We can compare cities like Phoenix in Arizona, highly car dependent, and the transport energy that requires versus places like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and then thinking the East, Singapore, cities, areas like that. So, and also in a kind of healthy cities framework, World Health Organization is embracing the concept, and the UN Habitat. And of course in Paris, Mayor Hidalgo is really pushing this and putting this into practice. So is it controversial? Not really. 2/3 of Britons like the idea of having easy access to goods and services in their neighbourhood within 15 minutes. That varies between different political wings, but it's still for. Perceptions on the ease of implementing, however, they do differ. So not surprisingly, in very urban areas, there's a perception that it's easier to implement 15-minute cities, and obviously that falls away the less urban you go. Probably not surprisingly, because although we've had the principles there for many years, we've continued in Britain to develop mono zones, if you like, of residential areas with no facilities, and very, very difficult to access local services other than by car. Even new developments, as the BBC highlights here, young couples trapped in car dependency. So yeah, there's no getting away that it's not easy. So I contend that the principle, there's widespread agreement that people require goods and facilities on their doorstep within walking distance, cycling distance. But obviously the pathway in getting there, that is a bit more controversial, how you do that. So just a few final thoughts then on how, the question was posed, can they work for everyone? This is the challenge that I see. Thinking about space and place, we need to be sensitive to the vastly different urban contexts across the UK. That's within cities and across the different cities of the UK. There'll be different pathways. There'll be no one size that fits all. On the social justice angle, we need to ensure that we have a mobility transition, so nobody's left behind in that. And the working poor, many of them who rely on their vehicles, aren't penalised, and other groups that other colleagues will talk about in their talks. And we need to think about the property market as well, and not propagating gentrification of those areas and becoming enclaves of gentrification. So for me, community engagement is essential for that. The ENACT project that I'll be leading will be looking at how we engage the community and improve their understanding of the 15-minute concept. We also need to think about sequencing as well. It's not easy just to put in harsh measures without thought on the sequencing that support people. So we need to put in the quality cycleways, quality footways, and think about joined up policy in terms of education, health and transport. So it's not just a transport issue or a planning issue. In fact, it's kind of a multi-agency issue. I guess for me therein lies the problem, governance and delivery. We've had like 13 years of austerity now. Councils are struggling financially. We've seen that local authorities are charged with implementing the national policy planning framework. There's reduced staffing and expertise. This council did an excellent job, but they're hollowed out. It's very, very difficult. They've got little control over public transport. It's privatised. Little control over education, and that's implicitly linked in terms of the school availability and the quality of education available to our state educated students. And it's slow and piecemeal implementation of infrastructure. So we're relying on planning and what we call Section 106 agreements rather than mass implementation of infrastructure that could support people walking and cycling. And then of course, it's been alluded to, we need to depoliticise this. There's been a moral panic caused from this, and this push to weaponise 15-minute cities, that it's going to lock people in their neighbourhoods, which is far from the truth, as many in here know. So we need to address those and take them head on and challenge these manufactured culture wars. And that'll be through communication, education, engaging people, and of course strong and inspiring leadership that will stand up to those conspiracy theories and myths. We've got to learn from good practice as well. You know, there's some things we do really brilliant in the UK, but obviously we can learn from other towns and cities and countries across the world, global north and global south. Two I've cited there, Sevilla in Spain, fantastic example of a city that put in infrastructure very, very rapidly, supported by the mayor and a mandate and a special unit to deliver that. So fantastic example if you want to go and read about Seville and its success in encouraging walking and cycling. Not as part of 15-minute city as such, but as part of, you know, the principles that 15-minute city espouses. And of course Paris as well, another city that's embraced the 15-minute city concept and you know, is pushing forward. So, but going back to my original point, the challenge is different context, and it will not be a one-size-fits-all for every city. There will be nuances for different areas. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Tim. Next up is Julia Thrift, who is a Director of Healthier Placemaking at the Town and Country Planning Association, an independent charity that was set up to support the garden cities, so over 100 years ago. And so she's going to be talking about TCPA's work with the 50-minute city, 20-minute neighbourhood concept. Thanks.
Thank you, Juliet. Yes, so I work for the TCPA, a charity, and what we'd like to see in the world, our vision is for homes, places and communities where everyone can thrive. And over many years we've been working to create or help others create healthier places. And there's now a lot of evidence that places that are complete, compact and connected support the health of their populations. So by complete, that means that those places have most of the things that most people might need most days. Compact means that the things aren't all spread out, they're quite close together. And connected means that you can get from A to B, from your home to whatever you're going to, quite easily, directly. You don't literally have to go all around the houses. So there's plenty of evidence about what creates healthy places, and this idea of complete, compact and connected places comes out very strongly from the evidence. During lockdown, we had some time because we couldn't do the work we were going to do, and we thought, well, let's have a look at what other countries have learnt about creating 15-minute cities or 20-minute neighbourhoods, because they are complete, compact and connected places, or that's what they're aspiring to be. So we had time to do some research. We spoke to people in Paris who are implementing Paris, the 15-minute city. We spoke to people in Portland, Oregon, who started off trying to tackle people driving all over the city and wanted to create something a bit more climate friendly. And we spoke to people in Melbourne, in Australia, who started with a problem that people were becoming obese, they were getting diabetes, they were having heart problems, and they wanted to help people become a bit more active. So starting from very different places, very different problems, they've all ended up with a very similar solution. Sometimes it's called 15-minute cities, sometimes it's called 20-minute neighbourhoods. The number of minutes really doesn't matter. It's about being able to get to the things that you want and need within a short walk or cycle. So we spoke to all these different people, we learnt lots from them. There were lots of common themes that came out from what they'd learnt. And we published a guide to creating 20-minute neighbourhoods in the context of the English planning system. And what we learnt from those conversations was that the vision for what that place might be like has got to come from the community. This isn't about imposing a rigid template on every different place. It's about saying to people, what do you think there should be nearby? And it's about talking to different groups of people. The things that elderly people want might be very different from the things that young people want. Teenage girls might want things that are very different from middle-aged men. So it's about talking to different groups in the community, finding out what they think works in that place, what's missing, and having a vision for how that place might improve over time. It's particularly about talking to the people who have less choice. they tend to be the people who have less money and they tend to have the worst health. Now, it could be people who are less mobile, it could be people who are particularly old, it could be making sure that you take the needs of children into account. But generally speaking, if you meet the needs of the people who have less choice, the place will work for most people, is what's been learnt. And it's also important to think that this place will change and adapt over time. So you might do some things and some of them might work and some of them might not work, and that's fine. It's a process, it's learning, it's saying, well, okay, that bit didn't work very well, let's change it a bit and make it better. So in our diagram, we put the sorts of things that most people would like to have nearby most of the time, but it'll be different in every different place. We've also spoken to people in urban areas in this country who are trying to make it work, and people in rural areas who've got some great ideas and are implementing them. If you go to that link that's on there, that takes you to a collection of resources on our website where we've got lots of webinars and guidance and all sorts of information. And it does cover rural areas as well as urban areas, and there's lots of really innovative stuff going on around England and Scotland and Wales. So for us, this is about creating places where people choose to walk or cycle or wheel if they're people using a wheelchair, or scooters or skates or whatever. So it's not about forcing people to do things, it's about creating places where the easy and the obvious thing to do is to walk or cycle. It's the attractive thing to do, it's the enjoyable thing to do, it's the fun thing to do. And there are many, many reasons why you might want to encourage that. At the moment, about 1 in 6 deaths in the UK is caused by a lack of physical activity. And even helping people to go for a short walk every day can really boost people's health. We're not talking about running marathons or playing football or hugely energetic things. A gentle walk every day is great for people's health. Loneliness is something that causes really measurable physical illness. It's judged to be as bad for somebody as smoking. Helping people walk and cycle helps people bump into their neighbours. You have a chat with somebody, you have those day-to-day interactions. And I think we all learnt during lockdown how important those small chats with people nearby, saying hello to someone in a shop, bumping into your neighbour, those things are so important in a way that perhaps we didn't recognise before lockdown. Air pollution is now recognised to be a much greater health problem than had been realised in the recent past. Even low levels of air pollution are really bad for people's health. So the more we can encourage people to travel by foot or on bike, the better. Carbon emissions, again, I probably don't need to say much about that. Helping people not use petrol and diesel is much better. Local economies benefit when lots of shopkeepers think that everybody goes to their shop by car, but very often, once streets are made better for walking and cycling, they discover that people actually pop in more if they're not driving. And during the cost of living crisis, if we can create places that are safe and attractive for people to walk and cycle, places where you don't need to own a car, where there is good public transport if you need a longer journey, that's going to help everybody through the cost of living crisis. So one final thing, and picking up on some of the things that Tim said, when we spoke to people in other countries who are implementing this, we recognised that the councils they have there are far better funded. They have much more money to employ people to work with communities, to employ people in the community, to talk to them about what the council's trying to do, to talk to their neighbours about what's working and what's not working. In Paris, the mayor has money that she gives to each neighbourhood and says, what do you want to make your neighbourhood better? Here's a pot of money that you can have to improve things. Sadly, in this country, we don't have the resources that other countries have had, and I think that does make it far harder to implement places which reflect the needs of the people who are living there. Makes it much, much harder. But that doesn't mean that the idea isn't worth pursuing for all those reasons. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia. Next we have Councillor Louise Upton, who is City Councillor here in the Walton Manor ward of Oxford. She's also Cabinet Member for Planning and Healthier Communities and the City's Cycling Champion. Thanks very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm also sometimes called the City Council Planning Chief by the Oxford Times. There's a slightly controversial article about the local plan just today in the Oxford Times. The controversy wasn't about 15-minute cities, actually, happily. It was about where we're putting housing. But to come to the local plan. So the local plan, every planning authority, and that is the City Council in this case, has to produce a kind of 20-year plan about, and this is the document against which all planning applications that come to us will be judged. And there are chapters on things like housing, where's it going to go, how much do we need, what's the mixture of 1-bedroom flats and 4-bedroom homes do we need. There are chapters on using land efficiently, so having a good density of housing, making sure you're not increasing flood risk, that kind of thing. That there's chapters on protecting our green spaces, increasing biodiversity, protecting our blue spaces as well. There are chapters on heritage, so how do we protect our beautiful heritage assets and the views of them, about making sure that we have very high quality design of new buildings. There are chapters on getting people moved around the city efficiently. So although we are not the Highways Authority, we want to make sure that good cycling and walking routes are incorporated into new developments, and that there are maximum levels of car parking, for example, that we put in. But I think probably the most important chapter in our local plan is the one that is about creating vibrant and pleasant places across the city, and it's about making sure that communities in all parts of the city have got facilities and the services that they need to really enjoy living here. And we have across the city, we have a whole network of different district centres. We've got Summertown, we've got Headington, we've got Blackbird Leys, we have Barton, for example, as well as local centres, we call them, which are sort of smaller, just runs of shops that nonetheless, provide a concentration of facilities for people. Now, why do we have policies that protect these and create these? For all the reasons that have been outlined already. It's about reducing the need to travel for people. It's about so that we have less congestion, so that we can improve our air quality, so that we can get physical activity built into everybody's day. But it's also really importantly about producing a sense of community. It's about wanting to reduce social isolation. So from the City Council's point of view, there are lots of reasons why we want to enhance and protect these district and local centres, and we have really strong policies to do that. We have, for example, all of the district centres have minimum amounts of retail frontages. So you can't convert all of the shops in Summertown into houses. So it varies a little bit depending on the centres, but you cannot go below 50%, for example, shop frontages in say Cowley or Summertown. Then there are other services that we expect to make up some or more of the percentage, which can be pubs, it can be banks, restaurants, takeaways, and those plus the retail mustn't fall below 80% of the shop frontages, for example. And this is actually crucial for maintaining kind of a critical mass of things in each one of these centres to ensure that bus routes will run to them, that they remain as destinations. We have other strong policies protecting pubs and cultural venues. So you cannot close down a pub or get rid of a music venue. You basically can't unless you have to absolutely prove to us that you've tried to make it work for years, you've done all the right marketing, and over a period of years we had a real struggle with one in Quarry that anyway some guy, he bought it, wanted to turn it into housing, but we held out, and in the end he was not able to do that. We have strong policies around making sure that if new facilities go in, that they will be accessible by walking and cycling for the majority of users. And I never really thought about it, but I guess that is actually kind of enforcing a 15, the idea of 15-minute neighbourhood. These should be within 15 minutes walk of people's houses. I think one massive contribution the City Council itself makes in practice is our own community centres. We have 19 of these across the city. They're generally run by community associations. But we've invested in them very heavily. I can think of the Donington, Bullingdon, Cllr, North Oxford, South Oxford, Florence Park. There's about, I think, 19 across the city. One I'm really proud of is our Rose Hill Community Centre. This has within it all sorts of clubs for under fives, for over 60s. It's got Zumba clubs, it's got youth clubs, it's got rooms to hire, it's got an advice centre if you need information about benefits or food banks. It's also got, we're now working with the NHS, and it's got some health provisions within it. So there's an early pregnancy advisory service within the Rose Hill Community Centre, which is increased attendance from some groups that don't always engage very well with health services enormously. They don't now have to get a bus across town to the John Radcliffe. So I really do feel that our community centres, which are always thriving places right in the middle of generally, well, often within, housing within some of our council estates, but all over. And this sort of web of policies, which we've never actually formally said within it are about 15-minute cities or 20-minute neighbourhoods, but they have been in our planning documents for decades, and they are all about achieving what I guess today might be thought of as 15-minute cities. And for us, I mean, who doesn't want to have a pharmacy that they can pop out to when they need an aspirin in the middle of the night? Who doesn't want to have shops that they can nip out to and pick up milk for breakfast, or a cafe they can go and meet friends in? For me, it is a no-brainer. Anyway, I will just finish by saying that the next draft of our local plan, which goes out to 2040, is just about to go out to consultation. It's going to our cabinet meeting next week, and after that it'll go out to consultation. So please have a look at it. Tell us what you think about it, what things are good, what things are bad that you'd like us to change. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Louise. So last up we have Richard Dunning, Professor of Land Economy and Housing at Liverpool University. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Juliet, for inviting me to speak. We're about to kind of get involved in a Q&A session, so to warm you up a little bit, if you'd like to put your hand up if you're broadly in favour of the 15-minute city concept. Okay, all right. Thanks for that, that's helpful. I am. But I'm going to be critical of it tonight. I think it can bring with it benefits that are social, economic, environmental and health related, but only if we engage with it critically. If we take it as a shortcut to planning and to thinking about the city, then it will fail miserably, is my view. So three brief points to get started. First, we need to think about time critically. It's called the 15-minute city after all, so time is somehow important in it. I think time is very useful for us. It's a useful description of spatial proximity, and it's a more useful description of spatial proximity than distances, because contemporary humans make decisions about time rather than necessarily the energy consumption required to travel distances, unlike perhaps our forebears. So we need to keep time as central to it, but we need to rip apart what 15 minutes actually means. There's very little agreement about it. Colleagues have already mentioned that. There's 5-minute neighbourhoods, there's even 2-minute neighbourhoods that people are mentioning. There is 10-minute towns, 15-minute cities, 20-minute neighbourhoods. They are widely divergent, and they will have material differences on the cities of tomorrow unless we actually bottom out what that time actually means. If we all walked for 15 minutes in a particular direction, we would get to very different services within the city. So we need to think critically about this. In Liverpool, we mapped every single address, and we measured 15 minutes, actually we measured 10 minutes, at 1.2 meters per second walking speed as a kind of average walking speed. And of Moreno's list of services, you could access about 12 out of 18 categories from almost every single address. If you walked at 0.9 meters per second, which is what we think of as functional aging walking speed, that reduces to well under 50% of those services. So a small difference in walking speed makes a massive difference in functional proximity. So we really do care about what that 15 minutes actually represents and means. That's my first point. The second point is around demographic change. The urban population's characteristics are spatially uneven. We need to recognise that at the moment, that our cities are widely divergent and highly variable. Service provision needs to be spatially and uneven and locally reflective. We can't roll out the same services, so it's great to hear people talking about local reflexivity on what they need within their neighbourhood. That is paramount for us actually providing services as well as designing streets that actually function within the 15-minute city. That means decentralisation of services. So there needs to be not only businesses, shops, etc., pharmacies that are implemented within these neighbourhoods, but we need to think about council services as well as national government services and schools, etc., within those 15-minute neighbourhoods. But the real problem we've got is not measuring that today. It's, as Louise pointed out, we're already thinking about 2040 and 2050. So we need to be thinking about two major differences that we need to be thinking about. One is, what does the future population look like and what are their needs going to be? We can't provide for the services of today and regret that tomorrow. And the other thing is that the UK has a massively ageing population. We need to recognise that service need is going to be different in different places, but also to plan ahead for that. So we can't just ask people today what they want in their neighbourhood. We need to be thinking as planners about how those neighbourhoods are going to change over time. And we need to create adaptive spaces within the 15-minute neighbourhoods so that we can change what services are provided locally. That's not insurmountable, and the work of the TCPA, their kind of diagram and the work that they've done on this is really helpful in terms of building that community engagement and thinking about the future. So do go away and look at their report. The third point is that we must keep thinking about the city and not the neighbourhood. So I think we should retain city in the title of the way that we're thinking. A city broadly, as any geographer will tell you, has 1,000 definitions, but roughly if we think about it as some spatial agglomeration of people, businesses and governments together, where UK cities are widely diverse. They have lots of kind of variation within them. There's lots of variety of businesses, less so of government. But we need to keep the city as part of that so we don't end up creating neighbourhoods that are locally different and therefore variegated in their ability to support those neighbourhoods. So we need to think about the connections between neighbourhoods and equal service provision, even if that's different across the totality of the city. And very briefly, to give you an example, Ghent is kind of the pinnacle of low traffic city or urban planning. They created a pizza map of the city and divided it up into 6 different neighbourhoods. So you could no longer travel through those neighbourhoods in your car, but you had to go out to the ring road and then back in. It's been massively successful. It's actually increased travel time in a car if you want to get across the city, so that's a good thing, weirdly. It's also improved health outcomes and active travel uptake as well, so massively successful. I don't know if you want to know this, Louise, but when they brought the idea around, the deputy mayor was sent a bullet in the post with his name on it. He was then implemented, it was then implemented rather than the bullet, and then he was re-elected as the mayor with the biggest majority that Ghent has ever seen afterwards, when people recognised the success of it. But outside of the city centre was a community that was a low-income neighbourhood, and their chances have diminished massively since. Not least because of the increase in house prices that's arisen within the city centre, and the neighbourhood has been left on the outside of that. So we can't just think about neighbourhoods, we have to think about the holistic city as we're thinking about the 15-minute city concept. So let's plan with diversity in mind. Let's plan, as people have been talking about already, for those minimum travel distances for people with mobility difficulties or limitations. Let's think about service decentralisation as well as active travel, and let's think about the city rather than just the neighbourhood. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rich, and to all the speakers. A great complimentary set of presentations there. Now I'd like to open it up to the floor to questions and answers. I wonder if I could ask people to explain who they are, just present themselves first, and if the question is focused on a particular panellist, if you could say who you are asking the question to. So who'd like to ask a question? Yes, here in the front. Yeah, the mic's just coming.
Hi, yeah, so I am Anna Walton. I'm also a city councillor, and so Louise knew I was going to ask an awful question. So I am interested about the sort of transition here. So, I mean, you know, there's two separate things really. There's building new stuff properly, but, you know, most of the buildings we have already will, you know, still be around probably in 50 years' time. And, you know, what do the panellists think are the best sort of bang for buck interventions you can do to sort of transition to slightly better neighbourhoods? And I'd also be interested in people's thoughts on ways of financing this.
So who'd like to go first?
Hi, thanks for the question. Ghent did it on the cheap. They bought some concrete bollards and they stuck them in over the weekend. That is really simple to do. What it needs is lots of planning and thinking in advance to make sure that those bollards are going in the right places. What we found in COVID is that people got the cheap element, they didn't get the planning element, and so lots of interventions went in the wrong places and actually were kind of problematic. So in Liverpool, our COVID active travel interventions, some of them lasted weeks because they weren't really thought through and so not particularly helpful. So actually, a lot of the active travel side, we've already got the infrastructure in place to support it. We've already got a lot of asphalt, which is pretty useful as a mechanism to get around cities. That's not that difficult. The difficult thing is actually changing it in the right way in terms of plan.
Thanks. I'm going to pick up on what Louise was saying about having community centres that have a variety of different uses. Increasingly, high streets have empty buildings that aren't really doing very much. They're usually very well connected by public transport. So if we can stop seeing buildings as having a specific single use and start to think about buildings that could be used in lots of different ways at lots of different times, then you've got the buildings, very often, buildings that need a new use. If you can get, for instance, funding from different sources to have different activities in them, then you can keep the building open and you could have your after-school club or your yoga club for the over 60s or your district nurse checking people's blood pressure or a once-a-week meal for a particular group of people who are isolated. It should be much easier than it is to do this. Part of the problem is matching up all the pots of money from different places, particularly NHS money can come attached to the person rather than the place sometimes. So we've heard of examples of planners who've tried to put in a community hub that was a building that could be used by lots of different people. And then the question was, well, who's going to pay for the light bulbs? Because we don't quite know. So it should be easier than it is, but in principle, there are empty buildings that could be repurposed and used at different times of day for different things. And some of those have bus stops next to them, which would help too.
I could have one example of where we're trying to do that is in Barton Park, the new development that the City Council has been doing over the last few years. So the primary school in the middle of that, out of school hours, is a community centre. People look at music for things out of school hours. But I think that's a really good point. To get more bang for your buck, make more use of the buildings that you do have that are in the right place and get as many facilities as you can into them.
Well, I guess I made the point about 13 years of austerity, so I'm going to say investment in public services. As simple as that, really. I think local authorities being pared back, they have budgets cut incredibly. Infrastructure has suffered, we haven't invested in infrastructure. We all get experience of just basic things like potholes in the roads. So yeah, for me it's the investment in public services, and that's obviously a governance and macroeconomic issue, isn't it? And it's ideological about which direction we go. But I think also on a cultural level, we also need to think about living arrangements in the UK. We seem to have density is anathema to the British psyche in terms of how we live, front gardens, back gardens, etc. I think we need to just learn from other European cities. Richard mentioned Ghent in terms of providing good family housing in city centres. Oxford kind of bucks the trend in a sense, in the inverted donut, isn't it? The quality housing and the desirable places are in the kind of city, and the kind of more deprived areas are pushed out on the suburbs, whereas that's not the case in areas. I'm from the Midlands. It's like, people move out from the city, they abandon it, it's not valued. So there's great potential there for reinvesting in our cities, valuing our cities, and obviously that needs a persuasive case. It needs people to push that and to highlight how cities are valuable. I think this was done, I was thinking back to 2000 actually. Lord Rogers made that brilliant treatise in the Urban White Paper, fantastic, and had a book, if I remember, City Sustainability. I can't remember, it's still around the 2000s. But that was an incredible treatise. It seemed pretty obvious to planners and urbanists, but somehow we've lost that, and I think we need to recapture that spirit and vision.
There's a question at the front, was there?
Hello, my name's Carolyn Danton, and I'm a retired local authority chief executive very recently for London Borough. So the point you raised is, I think, the critical one, which is how do you get people to back this who don't live in the city, and that is a really key issue. And cities can only be successful, frankly, if people come into them from outside as well. So we're really in danger of creating two communities, and the community who lives in the city, who supports different ways, the 15-minute city, etc., and the community outside who can't afford to live in the city, and therefore they are disadvantaged in that way. So what do we do to do that? You can't say Oxford City Council, for example, sort that out, because they're not responsible for all the residents who live outside the city. It's a much bigger issue, and I wonder how we do that, because if we don't do that, then there's always going to be resistance.
One thing I'd recommend is having a look at what they're doing in Scotland. There's some really innovative planning and placemaking going on there. The latest planning policy for Scotland, MP4, has a really strong focus on public health, and they're looking at how to improve the health of communities, both in cities but also in more isolated areas. They've got something called the Place Standard Tool, which is free to use, anybody can use it, and it's a great way of finding out what people think about a place. One of the things they're talking about is having local hubs, and this is starting to happen in England as well. So you might have a market town, which is in itself a 15-minute neighbourhood, but has good connections to the local areas. So if you live in a village, you might take one journey into the market town. When you get there, hopefully you can go there by bus, but if you can't, then you could go there by car. Then you can get out of your car, you can walk around and get all the things you need, rather than having to drive to one town to get one thing, drive to the next town to get something else. So I think there are interesting things emerging, but it's not easy, particularly with things like bus services being so underfunded.
Yeah, I mean, is it Carol? Caroline, very good point. I mean, I think it's just going back to my point about housing. It's inextricably linked. We can't leave this to transport planning. As much as I love transport planning, we can't leave it to that. It's a land use, it's a transport issue, it's a service provision issue in terms of housing, the housing crisis in the UK, and provision of housing, how we, where we put it, the nature of that housing itself. It's health policy in terms of local provision of health services. I go as far as say it's education policy as well. On the weekend I heard from the ex-Finnish minister talking about education policy in Finland, because they've had massive success there in children's attainment. versus other European countries. So of course all eyes are on why that's successful. And that was explained about quality education across the piece, the state education sector. All teachers have to have master's level education. The state funded education. There was the abolition of denominations of different schools. All kids went to the same school. There was investment in that. So of course a local school was the obvious choice that everybody has to go to. So that's obviously a bigger issue than transport and land use policy, but that has a major impact in terms of service provision and reducing the need to travel for communities in Finland.
Because there's so many other
Yeah,
questions to
sure.
come.
So the next, the guy with the grey top, that was the next hand I saw. I know there were lots of people interested to speak.
Hello, Jamie Hartzell, Chair of Oxfordshire Livable Streets, which is campaigning along the lines very much that our name suggests. I wanted to ask the panel, do you feel that there's value in people like your good selves trying to define more closely what we mean by a 15-minute neighbourhood or city, the times involved, the facilities involved, what's in, what's out, in order that we know what a good neighbourhood, such neighbourhood looks like, and we can then evaluate it, monitor and evaluate it and seek improvement? Or do we feel along the lines that Julia suggests that that would actually just be to squash out the opportunities for local participation and for local communities to define their 50-minute neighbourhoods, as everyone needs to be different?
Yeah, I mean, we should get loads more funding to do that. That would be really helpful. I think it needs to be contextually specific. It needs to be locally driven. But at the same time, if we're going to put civic resources into this, there also needs to be civic accountability for that, and that equity needs to be a part of the discussion. And I don't really get how we can have equity without a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve through this. So I think that's why I think we need to be clear about what the 15-minute city is, what distances we're talking about, what's the minimum acceptable standard that we are requiring of our cities for every neighbourhood within the city. Without that, I think it's quite difficult to fund one part of the city and not another part of the city to meet that. So I think the place standards that you were talking about, Julia, are one way that you could do that in relating a kind of generic kind of overview.
I wouldn't impose a template on everywhere, but what I would do is prioritise the communities with the worst health and the least money and start there.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, this kind of research, if you call it that, this finger in the wind has been done in terms of what people design. Just looking at slides from the presentation I gave last month in Dublin. Banks, GP surgeries and pharmacies are the most desired parts of a 15-minute city neighbourhood. There's a YouGov poll in February. But, you know, bus stop, post box, there's other basic land uses that some people don't have access to. You know, I know estates that have been put up in recent times that haven't got any of those facilities. So I just think, yeah, it's really important to map out what those facilities are and then to understand spatially, temporally, how you access those. But I think more important as well is the quality of links to those places. Because I think what we've missed, and certainly in my field, there's kind of this kind of objective measure of accessibility, which is, yeah, is important as a foundation, but there's also the quality of links between the homes and those facilities. I mean, in terms of quality of bikeways, footways, that sort of thing.
Just very briefly, yeah, I think there's no way we're going to be able to get every one of those facilities within 15 minutes walk of everybody in Oxford. So I think we have to be realistic. We can't retrofit that onto the city, but we need to be sure that they are in sufficient sort of concentrations where they are altogether, that then people can get to them on public transport if they can't walk and cycle to them.
So there were lots of questions, and I want to take, some from the back now. I'll take 3 at once, I think, if that's all right with the panellists. So there's a striped T-shirt at the back there. And then, the hand with the beige top, and then the blue next to them,
Hi, Larissa. I'm a student in public policy here. I'd love to hear a little bit on best practices and innovations on that stakeholder engagement point of view. about, while we're saying that 15 minute cities need to be responsive to certain groups and need to prioritize diversity, I'm wondering a little bit more on the how of that, or how you're seeing good examples occur.
Thanks. And then, yeah, that's right. The woman who's standing up there.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Santos and I live in Greater Leeds. I work here at Woodstock Road. And, you know, I can understand the resistance to this kind of project. Because if we think about during COVID, the LTN were imposed in the Cllr area. I used to leave home at 8 o'clock in the morning to get to work at 9, and it was a good trip. Today I'm leaving home at 7:30 in the morning. Sometimes I get late to work, and I don't get home usually before 7 o'clock. So for me, thinking about this through an ideal plan, it makes me think, you know, my life has gone worse. I spend 3 hours at least in a bus every day. Sometimes I can lose sense of where I am. And I think, you know, when we want to implement this kind of projects in a city like Oxford, which worldwide is so considered and respected, and people think that everyone here lives very well. If I go to Summertown, I have 3 supermarkets in the same street, five minutes from each other. In Greater Leeds, where you have families, children, a lot of the elderly people live there because there's a housing for elderly. There's a lot of people with mental health issues, disabilities. We don't have a supermarket. I have to walk 40 minutes to go to a supermarket. My neighbor that had bad mobility had to take a taxi, had to pay £10 to go to a supermarket. So in that sense, when I hear what is being said here today, I was happy to hear that someone says there's not one size that fits all. However, when we talk about Oxford, we can't forget about this reality. And this is most of the population. You know, so while everybody else that lives in the city center and this area of Summertown, things are quite good, but just go further down, go after Cllr, even after Cllr, go to Blackberries. See, I can't do my monthly shop on the corner shop. It's too expensive. And I've been to some surgeries done by Labour, and I asked them, what are you going to do about supermarkets here? I can't do my shopping like this. And they told me, oh, we don't have any plan, we don't have any control over what the supermarkets say, or where they're going to open. We have, you know, so what is the council doing? What kind of power does the local government have towards that kind of reality of life?
Great, thanks. And the third one was in blue.
Thank you.
If you could stand up, possibly. Thank you.
Laura Soden, Oxford resident. In the Central Oxfordshire Travel Plan, there are a series of actions. And Action 18 states to develop and support the implementation of the local toolkit of transport interventions that support 20-minute neighbourhood approach. My understanding of this, talking about the transport interventions, includes the LTNs, the previous questioner referred to, and as we're aware that the LTNs cause significant damage to local businesses in Oxfordshire, Oxford, and are deeply unpopular. In addition, there's also the traffic filters that are being proposed, and also we have significant opposition to the traffic filters trial that is going to be introduced next year. Since ANPRs are needed to operate the traffic filters, and also are seen to be now replacing the physical barriers of the LTNs, does this therefore mean that the council, Oxfordshire County Council, are saying that cameras and ANPRs are required to support the 20-minute neighbourhood concept? And if that is the case, can you please explain to me why?
Great, thanks very much for that. So we've got 3 questions, and don't feel you have to answer all of them, as long as we cover all of them for some of you, just conscious of time now.
I can't answer things specifically about Oxford or Oxfordshire, but I would come back to the point I made earlier about starting with the places and communities that have least choice and working to improve those and listening to people's concerns, as we've just heard so eloquently, and focusing on improving those places rather than starting with the places that are already working quite well and have lots and lots of facilities and functions. And housing comes into this very much as well, making sure that there's affordable housing. And it's incredibly difficult for councils at the moment to provide the facilities that people need. But there are, I think, some things that can be done, and certainly I think in Walton some of the things that can be done there are really interesting around using facilities to improve people's lives, really understanding what people need.
Can I have a quick, I'll have a go at the last sort of question or two. So there has been a lot of confusion between policies around the built environment, as in, which is really what we're talking about here, and then transport policies. So the county council, so that's not me, with the city council, the county council is trying to do things to reduce the absolutely chronic congestion that we have in the city. And the traffic filters are the scheme that has been developed, which models show, and I know that models are all wrong, but to a greater or lesser degree, but the modelling shows that that will make, by reducing the number of cars moving around the city, it would make it much easier for the buses. The whole point of the traffic filter scheme is funded by the Bus Service Improvement Plan, is to make bus traffic transport around the city much better. So I hope that the second question, who's having appalling trouble at the moment on the bus journey, once the traffic filters come in, that should be transformed, because they will be able to whiz through all of the filters unimpeded by so many cars. The low traffic neighbourhoods, again, are a separate, entirely separate thing designed by the county council there to make it nicer and easier for the people that agree, it's the people that live within them to walk and cycle to school or to wherever they're going. The implementation of them having come in before the traffic filters has meant that at certain times of the day it does make, it has produced extra congestion on the roads around them. And that is really unfortunate. But once the traffic filters come in, that problem will be solved. But unfortunately, now that Botley Road has been closed by Network Rail, that has all been delayed. So we are in an unfortunate position at the moment. And I understand that there are very mixed views on the low traffic neighbourhoods. For some people, they have been transformationally good. There are lots more people cycling to primary schools now. But for some people, they have been transformationally bad. We can't get away from that. But they are nothing to do with kind of the spatial planning aspects that we as the city council do. So ANPR is just, is one tool for traffic management. It is nothing to do with the 15-minute city concepts. Ridiculous question. I don't know anyone wants one of the other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think on ANPR, all civic infrastructure is managed, and there are choices that need to be made about who gets access to that civic infrastructure, and they are complex and difficult choices. The point around equity is really important here. That one of the main complexities of the 15-minute city is it deals so poorly with employment zones. It's not really thought through very clearly by Moreno, I don't think. And the diversity of travel times for employment and the accessibility of transit nodes within that. So that's a real genuine problem for the 15-minute city, but that is why we need to think about the city, the whole city, and city regions within this thinking about. We can't just devolve it to the neighbourhood level. It has to be integrated transport solutions. So it'd be great if, I'm sure you are thinking about that, but Oxford and Oxfordshire need to work together on that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it was Larissa that asked about, how do you do this? Well, I think envisioning is really important. It's actually raising the debate and discussion around what's possible and what's being done elsewhere. I often think, you know, when you go on holiday and you taste a dish you've never tasted before, you think, oh, that's really good, I'm going to try that when I come home. I think, you know, people need to be exposed to the things that are going on across the world, across Europe, and Richard's mentioned Ghent, that are quite possible in the UK, within the UK planning framework, the UK situation. Some of those are more difficult than others, but I think they should be brought to the table so people can have that imagination about what could be done. I'll give you an example. I did some work in the Netherlands, and I kind of rode out to those suburban areas that are like Greater Leeds, but they're all connected by separated high-quality cycle facilities into the centre, so people could choose the option of cycling into the centre. They're also networked with very good bus services that ran people into the centre. I was in Annecy over the summer. The buses were free to Annecy City Centre. The municipality had control over that. The buses were free. You know, it was a kind of no-brainer. Yeah, we've got problems with buses and spatial restrictions in UK cities, typically Oxford, cities that haven't got the kind of 60s modernist wide avenues. So yeah, it is a challenge, but again, in terms of governance of buses, it's very, very difficult in a privatised system. The council haven't really got any power over the bus services. Services can be just axed like that, you know. So it's talking about Richard's point about thinking of the city holistically. You can start to think of, okay, you haven't got a profitable route to some of the circuitous suburbs, car-dependent suburbs, where you could provide that if you had it under public control. So it'd be interesting to see how that happens in Manchester under Andy Burns, obviously brought the buses into public power. So let's have a look at that. Elizabeth, was it? Something about Greater Leeds. So yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. I gave you that example here of housing estates that's still being built that are car dependent, that have got no services. So, you know, we can't be under this kind of myopia that everywhere is going to be a paradisical 15-minute city. It's going to be really, really tricky in some suburban areas, and that does need close attention. It does need more attention, arguably, than your summer towns, than your county roads. So for sure, there's going to be different solutions for different areas, and we need to engage the public in those discussions. I'm sorry I didn't get to know the person in blue. As I understand it, you know, low traffic neighbours, again, it's a new label, it's a new narrative, but it's not new. I highlighted Colin Buchanan's Traffic in Towns. Colin Buchanan, you know, created the hierarchy of the road system in the UK and talked very much about urban rooms, which are kind of residential areas. But clearly we don't want traffic to be rumbling through streets that weren't designed for them. So we do have to have a hierarchy of streets and to channel traffic onto the roads that were designed for cars. Yeah, were latterly designed for cars in the 60s and 70s. So it's nothing new. I think counterintuitively, if you think of roads that are closed at the moment anyway, and then you propose to people that you open them for traffic to run through, people would go absolutely crazy about that, you know? So I don't think it's anything new or controversial in that respect. Of course, there's going to be tweaking, and there's going to be thoughts about how you sequence LTNs, what needs to come before in terms of service provision, quality of walking and cycling environments, public transport. So yeah, there's a question about sequencing and where it should be done and when. But in terms of a principle, I don't think many people would argue that it's new or it's something that's kind of radical or draconian. Yeah, stop there.
That's great. And I can see a forest of hands. I'm really sorry, but in fact the seminar time is over now. But in fact the conversation time isn't over, and you're welcome to stay on. We have drinks at the back, so do stay on and talk with either the speakers or with neighbours about some of these really fascinating and tricky issues. Just to say thank you so much for coming. I'd just like to let you know that this is a seminar series. We run it on the first and last weeks of term. The next one will be on Wednesday, the 29th of November. And we're going to be talking about health and wellbeing centres and how they can support us, non-conventional ways of supporting health and wellbeing within neighbourhoods and within cities. So do join us for what will be a fascinating evening, I think. So come along 29th of November. And it just leaves me to thank the four speakers very much for fascinating presentations and engaging discussion. Thanks very much.